American Dialogue, Tate McDonald from our corporate partner, Holland and Knight, Felipe Bernal from the Columbia University. Each of them brings a great knowledge and experience in their respective fields, and I am looking forward to these valuable perspectives that they are offering to us today. Well, let's start. Welcome everyone, and thank you very much for this opportunity to have this event. And let's start with Jorge. Good morning, Jorge. It's a real pleasure to have you here, and you have a tremendous experience with the Panama energy transformation. You were the Secretary of Energy for a long period in Panama. And you have this approach in the policy making and how to deal with the required transformations for the energy sector. And what do you think, Jorge, are the technologies that have the most potential for the development in Latin America, the technologies that we mentioned before? What kind of barriers are in for these technologies has in the region? Which policies are the most effective in promoting the technologies? How the resource of locations that every country has is a driver for this development, and how we can work in effective policies in the region to accelerate and have a better commercial conditions and economical conditions for these technologies. And do you think that the policies and the regulatory framework in Latin America is aligned to develop the new technologies? Thank you, Jorge, and go ahead, please.
Hello, good morning, Alfonso. Good morning to the panel and good morning to the people that is viewing this panel. Is a great opportunity and a pleasure to be here. I just want to start and do some thoughts with your questions, Alfonso, about policy and regulatory framework and barriers, challenges here in Latin America. But you have to start with your reality, your global reality, that it is a key enabler or disabler of your opportunities, and you have to know before speaking specifically on Panama or maybe Latin America, is that regarding to the energy transition frontiers, that is the idea of the panel. According to some analysis and studies around the world, around half of the technologies that the world will need to tackle climate change and our net zero commitments, etc., are just in prototype, pilot projects, or demonstrative stage right now. This was a projection that, for example, the International Energy Agency did in 2021, in 21, their first net zero projections. But it's interesting that only 2 years later from that first projection that they did in 2021, they said, no, right now is around in 2023, they lowered the estimate of technologies available from 50% to 35 to 40%. I mean, around in 2 years, around 10% of the technologies that they were projecting that were in development on early stage and pilot projects already were in commercial activities, starting to early commercial implementation and applying. So it's important, the pace and the speed of the innovation and technology is very important. And well, you add that artificial intelligence, well, the pace will go faster. But how do you play that with countries like ours in Latin America? No, it's not only about technology. We are not that, traditionally Latin American countries, we are not early adopters of technology because usually these technologies in early stages are more expensive than the traditional ones. No? And we have to tackle that. We don't have the capital, the ecosystem of innovation, etc. So we have to work with that. No? How do you do it? Well, you have to put in place, as you mentioned, and that's what we did in Panama. Identify the key short-term opportunities regarding each technology. Each one is different. The batteries is not the same that green hydrogen or the electric vehicles or photovoltaics or wind onshore or offshore, for example, that everyone in Latin America or various countries are talking about. But at the end, we don't have the fiscal resources from the governments to put in place, for example, subsidies or incentives in the way that developed countries can do it, in order to be early adopters of these technologies. So we have to live with that. You can put, as we starting to propose, for example, on the regulatory framework, the opportunity to have some regulatory sandboxes for this kind of technology in order to bring the private investment and the conditions for the privates to go ahead and prove and have the opportunity to put some kind of this technology. This wasn't approved. It was our proposal, but at the end we run out of time in our government, but it's there. It's part of the changes and reforms that is still going around here in Panama. But the other one is to how do you track and bring investment, not only about the technology that I was talking about, these pilots or early stage, but a little bit more commercially available innovations. And you have to put in place. You don't have the money from the government to put these incentives and subsidies, so you have to work on the enabling conditions for the private investment. So you have to put policies and long-term stability for these investments. They are not short-term, even though you can pick some short-term results. The lifespan of these investments are very, very large in time. So you have to put in place this overall investment environment, not only related to energy. You have to think about the cost of money, the interest rates, etc. For the investments in order to be put in place in our energy transitions, technologies, etc. So what are the main drivers in our country, mostly in Latin America? Of course, photovoltaics, is wind. Both of them contribute around 12% of our electricity matrix here in Panama. We are around 80% of our electricity matrix comes from renewables with hydro and wind and solar. So with batteries, we have set some initial regulatory signals to have batteries related to the transmission grids, to support the transmission grids. And we were preparing the first bid, the first tender for projects, for renewable projects with storage, with batteries storage. So I think that we have to play with that. You have to be aware of the reality. But and related to this, the reality of the investment that are the way, the private investment that are the way to be part of these technologies that we want to put it into practice in our countries. You have to be aware of the reality, the different projections say that we need around $30 trillion in investments on clean energy from now to 2030, and around maybe 10% of all that amount is coming to the development in development countries. 90% of that investment is going to developed economies. So you have to know that. How do you play with the climate change financial instruments and mechanisms to bring these opportunities on both on early stage technology adoption, but also in already commercial clean energy technologies. So this is an overview that I can give. You have to know where you have to put it in place, knowing that you don't have the capacity to compete and to be maybe these early adopters, but you can identify your niche technology adapted to your reality and put in place these policies, mostly related to the enabling condition for the private investment to come to your country.
Thank you, Jorge, and welcome as a senior fellow to the Inter-American Dialogue. It's a real pleasure to have you on board. And your comments, I can remember when in 2008 we started the transformation of the energy sector in Uruguay. An early transformation in comparison with the rest of the region, and the market requested us a feed-in tariff for the solar, for the photovoltaic solar panels of $180 per megawatt hour. 2 years after that, we prepare an auction for solar incorporation, and the price in the market was $90 the megawatt hour, and that was part of the learning curve of the technology. And if we decided 2 years before, with the pressure that the market were doing during that period, that could be a very bad policy making decision, and that and that is part of the learning curve in the region, how to incorporate some technologies that we are not providers of this kind of technology, and how much is the cost of the learning curve. And that is a very big issue for development countries, and that is part of your intervention. I really like your vision. Thank you, Jorge. Lisa, welcome to this panel. It's a real pleasure to have you in this panel. And you have been working a lot in different technologies. So you have an outstanding experience in the energy sector and working a lot in the region. And what are the challenges for technologies like smart grids and energy storage in terms of energy security and access? And that is a very important issue to highlight during this panel. How can the government encourage private investment in this kind of technologies? What would be the impact on consumer energy costs of the incorporation of these technologies in scaling up the technologies? What does the situation, considering the environmental cost that have to be included and incorporated in the for the energy markets, and what is needed to create a proper framework to help these technologies to be developed? Thank you, Lisa, and welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Alfonso, for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. To answer your question, I mean, I think we need to put this whole discussion into a context in which, you know, unlike in the US or in the European Union or other developed markets, electricity demand in developing countries is continuing to grow. So, you know, we're seeing that as part of the picture as well as decarbonization. So in Latin America, electricity demand is still growing pretty rapidly because of population and economic growth. Demand is projected to increase every year by over 2% through 2050. And then we still have over 16 million people in the region who don't have access to electricity at all. And then we have many more with unreliable power with frequent blackouts. So I think there is a major energy security issue here as well that needs to be addressed, and I think very much can be addressed by technology. And I think this electricity demand growth that we're seeing and need for more reliable power requires an expansion of power generation capacity, but also a big expansion of transmission and distribution infrastructure, which is a big bottleneck throughout the region. But the power sector has seen enormous innovation in recent years. You know, looking globally, there's been a huge amount of technological innovation and new advanced technologies. Some of the ones that you mentioned: smart grids, energy storage, also things like high voltage transmission lines and other types of technologies that improve transmission efficiency are allowing countries around the world to expand capacity and improve energy security. So, you know, for example, I think maybe in recent times, the most concerning country that faces an issue of reliability is Ecuador. I mean, we've seen a country that has faced severe blackouts that are causing real economic problems over about the past year because of inadequate infrastructure, heavy reliance on hydroelectric power that makes the sector vulnerable to climate variability and droughts, and a lack of private investment in new generation sources. And, you know, maybe they've seen the most severe outcomes in the last year, but other countries have faced very similar situation. And I think integrating technologies that need to be spurred by the right policies and regulations can solve a lot of these problems. Ecuador, for example, is looking to increase capacity from intermittent energy sources, and energy storage can enable that. There's also, I think we need to talk a lot about demand side management technologies. For example, smart meters can reduce spikes in demand during peak hours and extreme weather conditions that lead to outages. And if you couple smart meters with policies like, for example, time of use tariffs that charge customers during higher demand periods, this is a very effective way and has worked in many countries to allow utilities to reap the benefits of smart meters. You need to couple the technologies with the right policies and regulations to actually make use of them and to introduce them in the first place and then to use them in the right way. And then also prioritizing grid modernization and digitalization of the grid. And, this can include upgrading outdated equipment, integrating other smart grid technologies in the transmission and distribution system, implementing advanced monitoring systems so that you improve performance and you reduce the downtime of the system. All of this really improves energy security. And in more recent developments, artificial intelligence can also help. So just for example, artificial intelligence can be used for predictive maintenance so that, you can analyze when could I expect to see, vegetation or other issues on the transmission lines, creating the need for maintenance. And utilities can use data analysis to actually predict where they're going to need to maintain transmission lines. So that can improve efficiency tremendously. So I think there are a lot of technology and policy solutions that can improve energy security. And I think in the region, there is definitely, from my experience working with Latin American governments all over the region, there's a lot of interest in deploying more advanced power sector technologies. There's a lot of knowledge about these technologies and what they can do. And many countries are already in the process of developing the policies and the regulations that are needed to integrate the technologies. Only a few countries have really deployed them at a large scale. It's still a little bit early days. And I think incentivizing more private sector investment, as you asked about, is really important. For example, in energy storage, only a few countries in the region, Brazil, El Salvador, and Chile are some examples, have actually deployed utility scale battery energy storage systems. Most of the countries in the region that are using battery energy storage systems is usually for small scale mini grid or off grid. But a lot of countries are already in the process of developing regulations so that they can incentivize private investment in energy storage at a utility scale, which will allow you to do a lot more. For example, regulation, many countries don't have battery energy storage specific regulation. And it's helpful to have regulation that's specific, that's going to allow project developers to receive a payment for the different services that batteries provide to the grid. And this includes not only backup power, but also services that regulate the frequency of the grid to keep it stable. So, you need to proactively put those regulations in place to enable that. Argentina is one example of a country that's actually planning a competitive tender this year for the installation of backup power capacity, backup battery capacity during peak demand in the Buenos Aires area. So I think we're seeing more and more growth in this technology. And competitive auctions are also, in general, a good way for governments to incentivize the private sector to build more energy capacity. So I think those are the main areas where governments need to step in order to enable the deployment of these technologies. You also asked about cost. In terms of the cost, there are still some really emerging technologies like green hydrogen that in the vast majority of applications are not cost competitive without subsidies. But there's also a lot of low-hanging fruit. There are a lot of technologies, many of the ones I mentioned, that actually reduce costs to the system, that really pay themselves back very quickly, that are very cost competitive. But they do need a policy and regulatory push in order to allow countries to account for their benefits. So that's where I would say we are with those specific technologies and the cost issues.
Thank you, Lisa. I have a lot of questions about it. First of all, for the second discussion, the part of the discussion. First of all, the role of the subsidies in the market. The case of Ecuador is a real important case, and how can you manage smart grids, smart metering, and costs and prices, hourly prices for electricity when you have internal prices that are have subsidies for not only electricity, other kind of energy. That is a question that I have. And what do you think about the structure of the regulatory framework that was developed for other kind of management of the electricity systems, working with fossil fuels power, and the management, for example, of the different power generation? Is difficult to adapt the regulatory frameworks for the new technologies, and how to manage, for example, the storage of water in coordination with intermittent energies, and include better storage possibilities, not only batteries, other kind of storage, using the high installed capacity of hydro that the region has. That are part of the frontiers of the technologies for the energy transition that we have to move forward in the region, and that are new questions for the second phase. I will continue with Felipe. Welcome, Felipe. You are working for the CIPA in the University of Columbia. You are a very impactful think tank not only in the region, around the world. And the role of the think tanks, knowledge centers, is important in this process. And what do you think are the main challenges that Latin America faces in the energy transition, considering the new emerging technologies? How can the region take advantage of the changes in the global geopolitical situation? Do we have any opportunities in that sense? We are in the transit of a big geopolitical movement, and the region will be in the middle of that change. And what is your vision regarding that, and how can the think tanks protect and advance global progress on the climate action? There's probably there are some movements in supporting the Paris Agreement, movements in countries that are not aligned with the climate action, and what will be the role of the think tanks in that process? Thank you, Felipe, and welcome.
Thank you, Alfonso, and good morning to all. Basically, once we talked mainly about limited access of capital and concessional finance. This was like a major issue. Of course, it's still a top challenge, though recent capitalizations and reforms by multilateral organizations and catalytic capital donors have provided some relief. Nonetheless, the lack of available financial aid resources, as the disruption we've seen recently with US aid freeze, are pending global aid. However, we must also address the following, which I think are the main and the critical ones regarding the current context. First, democratic fragility and populist climate denialism, mainly from extreme right governments fueled by skeptic media outlets. This includes, as we've seen in different countries, the withdrawal of legally binding treaties, the deregulation and government efficiency policies, national energy emergency declarations, and tax incentives, which are likely moving forward the agenda towards encouraging investments in fossil fuels, specifically in shale, gas, and minerals, over clean energy projects, of course, leading to concerns about environmental degradation, the right protection of communities, and of course, the stagnation of the energy transition and the climate agenda itself. Second, geopolitical instability, of course, as you mentioned, is critical. But we hear this all the time in news. What's really behind this? It's important to understand that behind this, we have great power competition, global debt in record heights. We've seen, of course, critical resources and mineral shortages, the rise of authoritarianism, stronger nationalist rhetoric that closes, of course, frontiers, fragments the multilateralism. We see expansionist policies. This means grabbing more territory, arms race in AI-driven warfare, and nuclear capabilities. And this is taking countries to prioritize, if we talk about the trilemma, the energy trilemma, to prioritize security over and growth over equity and sustainability. A new world order, of course, is emerging, and we're configuring a new energy map, and a G0 world order is emerging. There's no leader in terms of a global power. Other relevant, of course, or another relevant or very relevant current exponential effect about what we're living is trade wars and tariffs, which of course are going to move prices above the capabilities of many countries that are having or are being able to purchase these technologies, leading to heightened geoeconomic fragmentation, splintered multilateralism, languished global aggregated demand, and of course, the reduction of consumer welfare. We're going to see higher prices, higher inflation in countries that are imposing these tariffs, and of course, higher interest rates that are going to take the servicing cost of debt still higher than it's today. More retaliation, confrontation, escalating conflict, and at the end, potentially war. No doubt, of course, the region is going to be affected both directly and indirectly by the spillovers of these challenges that I've mentioned, and some more than others, depending on their preparedness and the capability they have to navigate the crisis and seize the opportunities. Now, going specifically to the opportunities, I really and strongly believe that Latin America has the potential to become the global or a global powerhouse in the midst of the current geopolitical instability and the new energy map. We have abundant natural resources. We have a clean energy matrix that can, of course, have the potential of power shoring. We have the renewable energy potential to be developed, strategic positioning in global supply chains, and something really important, which is the demographic advantage. Based on current political scenario, I would add, of course, that countries in the region must prioritize energy sovereignty and security by servicing local demand with available sovereign resources, capitalize on surpluses, reserves in foreign markets to finance development, support the just energy transition efforts, and modernize the infrastructure required. We must catalyze the risk and stimulate renewable investment in projects and project development to expand energy capacity and, of course, enable the clean energy exports. We must also actively engage, Alfonso, and I think this is critical. I would love to hear more comments about this, but the region must actively engage with the Bridgetown Initiative to reshape the global financial debt structures, strengthen energy and resource security, and enhance economic resilience with debt swaps, carbon credits, provision of ecosystem service revenues, and embrace, of course, the interregional and south-to-south cooperation, strengthening trade relations and strategic destinations with Europe, for example, who is still really committed towards achieving the climate goals with clean energy and, of course, international cooperation. We must consolidate power sharing initiatives and, of course, well, at the end, just to end regarding the opportunities, I think, of course, it's important to tackle the challenges we have in the region, such as economic instability, infrastructure gaps, security concerns, lack of regional integration, dependence on commodities. We must move forward in the value-added streams. That's something for real that we have to do. What can think tanks do? As you know, and of course from the Inter-American Dialogue, you've also been leading these conversations. I think shaping policy and regulatory frameworks, holding policymakers accountable. This is something crucial right now because we've seen how with these authoritarianisms that are becoming or are increasing, this is something really important. Bridging science, academia, private and public sectors, supporting the energy transition, designing realistic and data-driven pathways for the energy transition. We can facilitate multi-stakeholder collaboration and conversations, countering disinformation and political pushback, mobilizing climate finance, and at the end, driving innovation and thought leadership.
Thank you, Felipe. I have a question regarding your geopolitical analysis, and I completely agree with your approach. But this is a question for the next for the final part of the discussion. Recently, the European Union and Mercosur had an advance after the election of Trump in United States, had an advance in the negotiations for a trade agreement between Mercosur and European Union. That will have two blocks probably working in aligned with energy transitions and other kind of climate actions. And what do you think regarding that? Because internally in Europe, there's no 100% agreement about the negotiations. There are countries that are against the negotiations, but could be an opportunity in that sense for the development of the green hydrogen, for example, and other technologies in the region. That is an open question for the final part of the discussion. Well, welcome, Tate. It's a real pleasure to have you in this panel. And I have some specific questions about the legal framework, the regulatory frameworks about that support the new technologies, because the energy systems were built for a different reality. We were talking about this. New technologies are emerging into an old system where they might not compete fairly with the existing technologies. What needs to be done to fix legal and regulatory gaps for new technologies? What should be ensured to help the business related to these new technologies in the entire region, in the United States and in other countries in the Americas? Who is doing this transformation well, and where are the biggest challenges for the new technologies? And how the United States new administration and the new position about renewable energies, new technologies impact in the region, specifically for the support for frontier technologies, and with focus on your expertise that are the electric vehicles market. And how could the United States position on electric vehicles affect the Latin American market? especially when China is very well positioned in the EV market in Latin American in Latin America, and what could be the movement in that sense. Welcome, Tate.
Perfect. Thank you, Alfonso. Thank you for having me today. So I'm Tate McDonald and I've spent the last, actually the last 15, 20 years focusing on technology commercialization in the US, but particularly, as many folks know, the last 4 years have been more active than maybe the 10 to 15 years before that here in the US. So we are very much coming off a great high of what the Biden administration did to move forward with technology commercialization in the US. And as I'm sure everybody on this call knows, especially with regard to energy transition and energy technology, what the US commercializes is often what Latin America benefits from. So what's important to note here is that we are still in the midst of, right when we have a presidential transition, we are still in the midst of a lot of these projects and a lot of this technology commercialization that is likely to impact Latin America and the broader energy world as well, energy transition across the globe. We're still very much in the middle of it. So having this transition that leads to legal and regulatory uncertainty right in the middle of all of this significant technology commercialization is certainly going to halt and impact what we see out of the last few years. So I'll start with the presidential transition, because that's what's on everybody's minds with everything coming out here in the US. But very much what we are seeing is uncertainty. And what we started to see uncertainty before the election, and we are seeing a lot of uncertainty now. What I will say, being somebody who I like to say that I've been sitting in the same seat the whole time, whether it was the Obama administration, the Trump administration #1, the Biden administration, now Trump administration #2. Obviously, we have seen a more significant regulatory and legal uncertainty than before in presidential transitions. But some of this actually isn't completely surprising and unknown. #1, the administration told us to expect this if they were to get elected. #2, this isn't dissimilar to what even the Biden administration did when they came in. They did a short pause on some of these programs to look at what the Trump administration had done. So there are a lot of significant headlines, especially with regard to the Green New Deal right now and the quote unquote ending the Green New Deal. But what's really important to note is what's a few layers below that and what that means for the broader global energy technology transition and landscape. So what I will start with today, and I think what's most important, is we have a lot of projects in the US that are creating amazing next generation technologies or commercializing electric vehicles, commercializing hydrogen, that will temporarily be in flux while we go through this administration. Overall, the last time this happened with the Trump transition, we saw a very rocky first 6 months while the administration did the same exercise they are doing now. Of course, there was a lot less to look at before, but they did do a very similar exercise to what they are doing now. And we had a pretty uncertain first 6 months of the Trump administration, the first year. What eventually occurred was the US Congress creates a backstop. A lot of these programs are very bipartisan, and the US Congress created a backstop in that first Trump administration that encouraged a lot of these initiatives and programs to move forward. So what does that mean for today? And what does that mean for this landscape? And what it means is that we are going to live in some uncertainty for the next 3 to 6 months that is going to impact some of the projects that have been funded and encouraged that will lead to technology that will be exported across the Americas. However, the intent isn't to stop all projects. The intent is just to make sure that the projects that are moving forward can align with the Trump administration. Now, some of them too, remember, especially with regard to electric vehicles, the Unleashing Energy EO has been one of the more active executive orders, and it does have explicit language on killing the EV mandate. It does not have explicit language, nor can it impact projects that have already been obligated and are already underway. There are some efforts for some uncertainty in that, but the bottom line is those companies with a lot of significant loans, grants, have contractual documents from the US government that will make it very likely that they will move forward. Now, if they miss milestones or aren't abiding by their contract, that is a different story. And those are the projects that may not move forward. But overall, even if you are in like EV and transportation, innovation, and electrification or hydrogen, if you are meeting your requirements under your contract, it is likely that those will move forward. They are testing the parameters of that, which is of previous legal precedent, which is giving some uncertainty into the market. I will say the other place that very much we believe that will end sort of where we are now, but will be in flux, is the tax credits. So that will impact US development and US projects to some degree, but it is important to note that a lot of these things have binding contracts from the federal government that are very hard to undo. So I think how I would like to sum this up, I want to be mindful of time because I'm sure there's audience questions, but there is a lot of projects still underway that are bipartisan. What I will so in areas of energy storage, critical minerals, and even a little bit of energy storage and critical minerals especially. And nuclear was small modular nuclear reactors, geothermal. You will see a lot of technology supported in these areas moving forward, and the uncertainty will end sooner from a US landscape. Where we will have a little bit of ongoing uncertainty is definitely in the EV and transportation market. However, some of these solutions really make sense in any environment to move forward, especially in areas where we may not have abundance of natural gas or other options, where instead you could put solar and batteries to develop a grid. In areas like that, if you read new Secretary Wright, Secretary of Energy, was confirmed last night, his whole paper and his manifesto is bettering human lives through energy. So the bottom line is to just remember that, yes, we have this uncertainty for a defined period of time that will continue on everything in the US, tax credits, funding that exists. But after that uncertainty, we do expect especially the areas that are bipartisan, like critical minerals, energy storage, nuclear, geothermal, to move forward maybe even more rapidly than the Biden administration moved things forward in the US through the Trump administration. And with a focus on different things, national security in the US overall, global national security, and then technology innovation, and really making sure we're developing more abundant energy at a cheaper cost. So those things will move forward a little faster, but even when you have things that are not supported by a Trump administration in technology, which is mostly EVs at this point, that they are really looking at, a lot of these big mega projects have binding contracts that will be very hard for the Trump administration to get out of. So in some, lots of uncertainty now, but we do expect that to lift and hopefully expect a lot of these strong projects to move forward.
And
that will benefit the broader.
And cross fingers.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you, Tate. It's an amazing approach and analysis of the US market. And I have a particular question regarding the supply chain and the impact of the higher tariffs to the different components and imports in the US market. That will have a direct impact in the internal prices and the competitive conditions for US products, and that is a question that I have. I have a question from the audience, and the question is, what is thank you to all the panelists, and we will start the second part of the conversation. We have 5 minutes, not more than that, but let's go with the question of the panel. What do you think that the trade war with China, especially if both the European Union and US continue to move towards tightening the penetration of Chinese input in their economies, and could benefit Latin American countries? In other words, if tariffs start making Chinese solar panels uncompetitive in the European Union, and would have other kind of impact in the Latin American countries. I believe that if one of you have an answer to this question of the audience, probably you, Tate, or Felipe, or Lisa.
Well, I can start. I can't believe actually that I didn't mention tariffs. So I apologize for that, because that was yesterday's news and now they're lifted again. So the bottom line is that we do expect continued uncertainty that will be, I mean, especially in an area of critical minerals and supply chain. I do think that is where it's an opportunity for Latin America to work with the US, continue to work with the US in building a resilient supply chain overall. I will say, solar panels, maybe I'll leave it to others to comment on. I don't know exactly what to expect on solar panels, but I will say I think there's opportunity in critical minerals and supply chain, despite the tariff noise that we are seeing. But it is all about, the one thing I will leave with, it is all about engagement with the US. It is all about engagement with the president and the new administration, and that's where we're likely to see this opportunity unfold.
Perfect.
Yes, I would add specifically something which is really interesting. We talked about this backstage, and is that China is entering a deflationary cycle. And this is crucial when we're talking about tariffs, because independently of the tariffs you have, for example, the US, there's some estimations that with 10-15% of tariffs, China products are going to still be competitive. So this is something that we must have in mind, of course. Not only related to the price tax, but also, for example, with the border carbon adjustment mechanisms, which is also very important when talking about the EU. So this would be the 2 points I would add to Tate's comment.
Jorge, Lisa, do you want to add something?
I think the speakers covered it really well. I don't have anything to add.
Jorge?
Yes, I just want to add, it's not only about solar panels, it's about everything, on this tariff and going from this China, Europe, or China, US, the differences, they will took advantage of that. No doubt about it. You can use solar panels as an example, but you will go to electric vehicles and batteries, or only on the energy side, but you would say on the rest. And on the minerals, there's a reality right now. The mining capacity and the mining processing of critical minerals for the energy transition are very, very concentrated in China. Above 70% of the world capacity, both on mining on the sites and processing with the technology to produce technology to the energy transition, is concentrated in China. So that is something that you have to tackle. And I have a coincidence with Tate that uncertainty is the reality right now. It's and it will be in the next months. And as you said, we can cross fingers in order to expect that we are talking about months only. but sometimes you have to get ready for the worst and expect the best. No, sometimes there are people that say that a pessimist person is an optimist that read newspapers every day. So we hope that we can continue to be optimists, and we have to get ready, no, in Latin America. And I just want to add something what Felipe had said, no, and how do Latin American countries have the opportunity to coordinate better, to cooperate finally to present a case as a region, you know? And that's a key issue regarding China, regarding the US, regarding European Union. And I think that's a key a challenge for us, no? So I will leave it there now.
Thank you. Thank you, Jorge. Michael, we have two questions. Do you want to read the questions for the panelists?
Yes, I can start with the first one. With the recent power grid failure in Cuba, do you anticipate any large overhauls to address the energy crisis throughout the island? Do you foresee the private sector in Cuba growing to address their failing and outdated power grids? Is there an investment appetite in the region to support Cuba?
Well, if I can start, because one of my friends, the leading voice of the opposition of Cuban regime, and definitely it's interesting how the regime has been declining almost every day more than ever because of the lack of coordination, even within their partners. I mentioned also trade partners. We can see this because at the end, many of the partners that Cuba has, such as Russia, at the end are focusing more on their own matters, such as Ukraine and what's happening, and they don't have any resources. And at the end, they're not prioritizing this cooperation that they had before. So these are the spillovers that Cuba's having, of course, when talking about power systems. I think this also is going to be one of the most it's going to undermine even more the regime because people are mobilizing. We saw not only because of lack of energy, but also because of lack of food. And these two things is what taking people to the street. And there is a huge faith, at least today, that this is going to take the regime to negotiate in a sense. We must see what's going to happen with Trump, of course, and what's going to be the treatment towards the island. But we see, for example, in Congress, with Speaker Johnson and other speakers that are really moving forward with the agenda, was restoring democracy, not only in Cuba, but also in Venezuela.
Thank you, Felipe. The other question, Michael?
Yes. How will the Trump administration and a Republican Congress impact the offshore wind energy sector? How will this impact Latin America?
I could comment on this one. I mean, I think the offshore wind sector in Latin America is very underdeveloped. It's not much of a focus in most countries. Most countries, don't have any sort of regulations or incentives for offshore wind. There's, very little development. And there's still so much potential for onshore wind. I think, unlike the US and Europe, which have really started developing offshore wind, in Latin America, in Brazil and Colombia, across the region, there's still so much untapped potential for onshore wind that I think that's going to continue to be more of a focus in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I can add that you have, as Lisa said, you have in most of the countries of the region onshore possibilities with lower cost. The levelized cost of energy for wind power in most of the Latin American countries are in the range of $30-40 per megawatt hour. But when you are considering offshore, the cost of offshore is higher than $80 per megawatt hour, and that is a gap of the cost, a huge gap, and that is not efficient to be included when you have the possibility to incorporate more onshore wind. It's a completely different situation in Caribbean island, that you have a lack of access to land in some islands, but you have a lower the wind potential in that places, and that is the main barriers that you are facing for offshore wind in the region. And some countries that are considering offshore wind is part of the long-term development and long-term policies, and not and some pilot projects for the development, but not the high scale. Yep. Well, we are on time. Thank you very much to all the panelists. It was a real pleasure to have this conversation. I believe that it was very high level conversation, and we have your insights in most of the areas that we were focused on this panel. The idea was to have an approach on the different technologies that we are considering for the climate action, electrical vehicles, storage. We talked about storage. We talked about the market of electric vehicles. We were talking about the smart grids. We were talking about the different opportunities for the region. We were talking about geopolitics. We were talking about the impact of the new geopolitical situation, not only in the region, around the world, and what will be the potential impact for these technologies. I am very happy to have this conversation. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Jorge. Thank you, Taite. Thank you, Felipe, for your contributions, and for all of you. Thank you very much.